This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 54 of the 1001 Movies podcast, based on the book 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. This week we'll be talking about Francois Truffaut's 1973 film Day for Night.
Beaucoup de silence et beaucoup de justesse. Bien lentement et décontracté avec moi. Bien lentement.
Francois Truffaut's first three features, The 400 Blows, Shoot the Piano Player, and Jules and Jim, were defining pieces of the late 1950s and early 1960s French New Wave, and they probably remain his most popular works. All three are subjects of future episodes. Truffaut was a contemporary of Jean-Luc Godard, another founding member of the French New Wave, and the director of Weekend, which was covered back in episode 4. As fellow filmmakers and critics, the two remained close throughout much of the 1960s, and they more or less drifted apart during the 1970s, but it was the production of Day for Night that would affect their relationship the most. Truffaut drifted away from the French New Wave with 1966's Fahrenheit 451, a moralistic science fiction tale based on a book by Ray Bradbury. The production of the film was fraught with problems, from obtaining finance to Truffaut's problem with actor Oscar Werner. From the point the rights were purchased from Bradbury to the release of the film, 6 years had elapsed. And in the interim, in 1965, Truffaut made The Soft Skin, which was more akin to his previous films, but which met with lukewarm reviews, as did Fahrenheit 451. But his films were not his only work in the 1960s. Truffaut collaborated with his friend Helen Scott to write a book about Alfred Hitchcock, Truffaut's idol. Rather than have it be a simple biography, Truffaut wanted it to be a long interview, with him asking Hitchcock about each of his films. He was delighted when Hitchcock agreed to do the interview, and in August of 1962, the two directors sat down, with Helen Scott as an interpreter and stenographer, to conduct an interview that would take 6 days. The book itself was not published until 1966, and Hitchcock had already made 2 more films, Marnie and Torn Curtain, so Truffaut needed an additional 3 days of interviewing him in July of that year before the publication 3 months later. It was a handsome book, complete with dozens of photographs, and most likely remains the most in-depth interview of a filmmaker to this day. It also brought attention to Truffaut from many Americans. Upon its publication, the book sold 36,000 copies in the United States, compared to only 5,000 in France. These times were not all good for Truffaut, and in 1965 his wife Madeline asked him for a divorce and the two separated, although they would remain friends for the rest of Truffaut's life. In 1967 he made The Bride Wore Black, a crime drama, followed by Stolen Kisses, a sequel to The 400 Blows, and featuring Jean-Pierre Léaud reprising the role of protagonist Antoine Doinel. Truffaut also cast actress Claude Schad in the film, with whom he had an affair, but later broke off their impending engagement. Schad was not the last actress Truffaut would become involved with. For his next film, 1969's Mississippi Mermaid, he cast Catherine Deneuve in the lead, and the two would live together for months before Deneuve left him, which practically caused Truffaut to have a nervous breakdown. The fact that Mississippi Mermaid was a critical flop didn't help matters either. However, his next film, 1970's The Wild Child, which featured Truffaut himself as a scientist studying the life of a boy left to live in the woods, was a smashing success. This was followed in the same year by Bed and Board, the third in the 400 Blows trilogy. Recovering from his breakup with Deneuve, he would make 2 more movies, the tragic and melancholic Two English Girls in 1971, which was a failure in France, and A Gorgeous Girl Like Me in 1972, which was met reasonably well by critics and the public. During the editing of Two English Girls, Truffaut had become entranced by an old abandoned exterior street set that had been used for an American film years previously. He told his former collaborator on The Bride Wore Black, Jean-Luc Richard, that he wanted to make a film about the making of cinema, and the two wrote the script for Day for Night, about the comings and goings and affairs and tragedies that befall the cast and crew while making a film called Meet Pamela, about a man who has an affair with his son's fiancée. Jean-Pierre Léaud, a Truffaut staple, was cast as the actor playing the son, while Jacqueline Bisset was hired for far less money than she would normally accept because she just wanted to be in a Truffaut film, to play the actress playing the fiancée. After his successful acting in The Wild Child, Truffaut himself played Ferrand, the director of the film, within the film. Filming for Day for Night went as smoothly as could be expected, and it was a critical success upon its release. It won an Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film, and nominations for Truffaut and his co-writers, Jean-Pierre Richard and Suzanne Schiffman, for the script, Truffaut for his direction, and Valentina Cortese for Best Supporting Actress for her role as the alcoholic and imminently washed-up actress portraying the film within the film's struggling mother. The film had some fallout for Truffaut personally, however. In May of 1973, he received a letter from Jean-Luc Godard, who had just seen the film. Godard wrote, "Probably no one else will call you a liar, but I will. It's no more of an insult than fascist, it's a critique. And it's the absence of a critical view such films leave us with, those of Chabrol, Ferreri, Verneuil, Delanoy, Renard, etc., that I object to." Later in the letter, he says, "Liar, because the shot of you and Jacqueline Bisset the other night at the restaurant Chez Francis isn't in your film, and one wonders why the director is the only one who isn't screwing around in Day for Night." Godard was referring to Truffaut's depiction of his own character in the film as celibate, despite the fact that he had a reputation for sleeping with many of his actresses. He closed his letter by saying, "After Day for Night, you ought to help me, so that audiences don't think that the only kind of movies being made are your kind. If you want to discuss it, fine." Truffaut was incensed. He replied with a 20-page letter, perhaps the most biting language in which was the following: "I've read your letter, and I find it disgusting. Because of that letter, I feel it's finally time to tell you, at length, that in my opinion, you've been behaving like a shit." He goes on to tell Godard that in spite of betraying himself as the victim, he's always gotten everything he wanted when he wanted it. This was likely in response to Godard's sarcastic request for money. The two men never spoke again. After time, Godard was not the only one who found fault with Day for Night. Critic Jean-Louis Bory, after praising the film, would later write an article in which he accused Truffaut and other filmmakers of selling out to the system, churning out a film that not only appealed to the masses, but praised methods of filmmaking that veered away from Truffaut's craft as an independent filmmaker. Truffaut wrote to Bory, claiming that he was not a part of the system, merely that he knew how to work with and around the system, and singly defended each one of his films one by one. This was not, of course, the conclusion of Truffaut's career, but by the release of Day for Night, it was clear that he was entering his own personal era of filmmaking. He would go on to make many more, including 1980's The Last Metro, the making of which, as well as the remainder of Truffaut's life, is a subject for a future episode. What did I think of Day for Night? I am only familiar with Truffaut's The 400 Blows, but this was something completely different. And it was good. The opening shot, which follows a man as he emerges from a metro station onto a busy sidewalk and casually walks up to an older man and slaps him in the face, is soon revealed to be a long take being filmed by the crew. The director asks them to do it again, and the scene is replayed, this time with the director shouting out directions to the actors. It's a statement of how film can often reflect reality. This is, in essence, a documentary of Truffaut's experiences as a director, how to deal with temperamental and lovesick actors, as well as tragedy itself on set. Some of the actors are spoken about before they even reach the set, showing that sometimes their reputations precede them, although it's interesting how this viewpoint is reserved strictly for the two female leads. The film does teeter irritatingly towards a little too autobiographical at times, such as when Truffaut's Ferrand is tossing and turning in bed, the day's problems flowing incessantly through his head, and when he finally drifts to sleep, he dreams in black and white of a boy using a stick to steal photographs of Orson Welles. The scene is repeated 3 times throughout the film, and each time had me inwardly rolling my eyes. Does this mean that Truffaut admits he's making a commercial film, yet dreams of making independent cinema like when he was young? The irony throughout, of course, is that Meet Pamela, the film within the film, is not a particularly good movie, and everyone working on it seems to know it. The plot of Meet Pamela, with its tragic love triangle, is not unlike the plot of one of Truffaut's own films, so one could understand where Godard was coming from when he took it as Truffaut's inward confession that he was selling out to the industry. Truffaut also has a strange habit of segueing scenes with random and extremely short shots of things like furniture and staircases. I'm not entirely sure what he was trying to say here, and I found it a tad pretentious and annoying, like watching an obscure art film with a cult following, ignorant of some inside knowledge that the fans were in on. There is a moment that begins comically, but leaves a resonance. The flabby, middle-aged production manager is constantly being shadowed by his wife, who thinks he's going to cheat on her while making a movie. During the resolution of a crisis involving a sexual encounter between 2 of the actors that results in a temporary halting of the film, the production manager's wife practically looks into the camera lens and screams to the crew, "What is this, filmmaking? You call that a business? You've no morals. Everybody sleeps with everyone. What is it but a dirty lie? You call that normal? Filthy cinema, you're a plague on the world. You smell of filth. You'll pay for your sins. I despise you." Not only is this an interesting comment on cinema itself, but it echoes a scene in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, in which a terrified woman looks into the camera and practically accuses the protagonist, and, through her, the audience, of causing the trouble. Since Hitchcock was Truffaut's idol, I am willing to bet the similarity has a connection. Few of you listening have probably seen this movie, but if you enjoy anything by Robert Altman, as I do, I would recommend Day for Night as an introduction to Truffaut. The story has the same ensemble cast and multiple plots, much like any of Altman's pictures do. There is also some comedy in there, such as when Valentina Cortez's drunken actress has to do take after take in a simple scene while the rest of the cast and crew suffer on. This film deserves a watch. That's all I have to say about Day for Night. Tune in next week when we discuss 1955's Smiles of a Summer Night, directed by Ingmar Bergman. In the meantime, you can email me questions or comments at 1001moviespodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at 1001moviespc, and look for the podcast's Facebook page. Until next time, happy viewing.